The morning sun rose lazily over Lagos, washing the skyline with gold and haze. The hum of distant danfos, the impatient honking on Third Mainland Bridge, and the rhythm of daily struggle were already in motion. In the quiet estate of Lekki Phase 1, where bougainvillea bloomed against white-painted fences, a particular house stood out. Not because it was the grandest, but because it was immaculately arranged, spotless to the point of intimidation. Inside that house, Amelia Morgan stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of her husband's shirt with the same precision she applied to everything in her life. Her black hair was tied in a neat bun, and her tailored blouse looked as if it had been ironed by angels. The faint scent of jasmine perfume lingered in the air. "David, hold still," she said firmly, tugging at his tie. Her husband, David Morgan, a tall man with soft eyes and a gentle face, stood obediently. His hands were in his pockets, his expression calm but distant. He'd learned long ago that when Amelia was in her perfection mode, silence was safer than words. "There," she said, finally satisfied. "You always forget to align your tie properly. It makes you look unserious." David nodded slightly. "Thanks, Amelia." She smiled faintly, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. "You know first impressions matter. You're meeting that new client today, right? What's his name again? Mr. Adewale?" "Yes. I hope you remembered everything we discussed last night about presentation. Confidence, posture, tone. Don't let your voice trail off when you speak." David gave a small, weary smile. "I'll remember." Amelia's expression softened a little, though her eyes still held that sharpness that never seemed to leave. "Good. After all, you represent not just yourself, but us. The Morgans." She said that last part with pride. To Amelia, their marriage was a brand, something that had to be spotless, admirable, enviable. But beneath that polished exterior, the air between them was heavy, like a living thing gasping for space. David picked up his briefcase from the console table near the door. "I'll see you in the evening." Amelia nodded. "Don't forget to call when you get to the office. And please don't eat from those roadside restaurants. I left your lunch in the fridge. Eat that." "I will," he said softly, but as he stepped out, his chest felt tight. The morning air outside felt freer than it had any right to. He paused on the porch for a moment, inhaling deeply. He didn't even know why he did that anymore. It had become a quiet ritual. Breathe before facing the world. Amelia stood by the window after he left, watching him reverse the car. There was something oddly satisfying in seeing everything go according to plan. David was a good man, calm, decent, loyal. But in her mind, he needed guidance. Left alone, he'd drown in mediocrity. She had promised herself, ever since they got married 7 years ago, that she'd help him become better. What she didn't realize was that she had slowly taken away his sense of self in the process. To outsiders, the Morgans seemed perfect. They had a comfortable life. David worked as an architect in a respected firm in Victoria Island, while Amelia ran a thriving interior design business. Their home was always organized, their cars clean, their marriage the envy of neighbors. But within the walls of that house, David's voice had grown smaller and smaller over the years. Amelia decided what color of curtains they used. She decided what car they should buy. She decided how much they should save, who they should visit, and even what church they attended. Every decision went through her, and though David often disagreed silently, he rarely said so out loud. It wasn't always like that. When they first met at a friend's wedding in Acacia, Amelia had been charming, vibrant, confident, and full of dreams. David was drawn to her intelligence and drive. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Sharp-tongued, focused, and beautiful. He admired her decisiveness back then. It made him feel safe. But somewhere along the way, that decisiveness hardened into dominance, and his admiration turned into quiet submission. That evening, when David returned home, the smell of a goosey soup filled the house. The dining table gleamed under the warm chandelier. Amelia was already seated, scrolling through her phone while waiting for him. She looked up as he entered. "You're late," she said. "Traffic," he replied, loosening his tie. You should have left earlier. You know Lagos traffic isn't kind to anyone. He sat down quietly. I know. Did you meet with Mr. Adiwale? Yes. And? She raised an eyebrow. David hesitated. He seemed impressed. Said he'll get back to us next week. Amelia frowned slightly. You said seemed. That doesn't sound certain. David sighed inwardly. He said he liked the proposal, but he's considering other firms too. She put down her fork. You should have been more assertive, David. Clients like confidence. Maybe if you had offered him a revised draft on the spot. I did. He cut in softly. He said he'd think about it. For a moment, silence filled the room. Amelia stared at him, as if assessing his response. Then she nodded curtly and returned to eating. Okay. Hopefully he'll see sense. David chewed his food quietly, staring at the tablecloth's patterns. The sound of the ceiling fan was louder than usual. After a while, Amelia started talking about her next client, the new design she wanted to pitch, the suppliers who were incompetent, and how she planned to fire one of them. Her words filled the air, leaving David little room to speak. When she finally paused, he said gently, Amelia, have you ever thought we could? Maybe take a weekend off? You and me. Go somewhere outside Lagos. Ibadan? Maybe? Or the beach house in Ape. She looked up in surprise, then gave a short laugh. A weekend off? David, you know how much work I have. My schedule is packed. I know, but maybe we could plan ahead. We haven't really. David, she interrupted, setting down her fork. We're building something here. Vacations can wait. You need to focus more on your projects too. You can't keep talking about relaxing when there's so much to do. He nodded quietly. The idea shrank inside him. She smiled faintly and resumed eating. You're such a dreamer sometimes. He managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Over time, David began to feel invisible in his own home. His laughter became rare. He still loved Amelia, or at least the version of her he once knew, but he no longer knew how to reach her. She was always planning, organizing, correcting. Even their intimacy had become mechanical, something scheduled between meetings and phone calls. At night, she would climb into bed, set her alarm, and immediately start talking about the next day's tasks. One evening, as he lay beside her, he said softly, Do you ever miss how we used to be? She frowned, scrolling through her tablet. What do you mean? I don't know, he murmured. We used to talk more, laugh more. It's like, everything's about plans now. She sighed, setting the tablet aside. David, you're being too sentimental again. We're adults now. Life isn't just about laughter. We have responsibilities. He nodded. I know. I just miss you. Sometimes. Amelia smiled faintly and touched his arm. You're sweet, but don't overthink things. We're fine. Then she turned off the light. He stared into the darkness, feeling more alone than he had ever felt, even with her right beside him. Weeks turned into months. Their conversations became shorter. Amelia's tone grew sharper. David started working longer hours, not because he needed to, but because the office felt more peaceful than home. One Friday evening, he stopped by a small lounge on the island after work. He sat alone at the bar, nursing a bottle of malt. The place was dimly lit, the music low. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe. That's when he met Chloe Daniels. She was sitting a few stools away, laughing softly with a friend. Her laughter, genuine, unforced, caught his attention. When her friend went to the restroom, she turned and noticed him. You look like you've had a long week, she said with a friendly smile. David chuckled. You could say that. Architect, she guessed. He blinked. How did you know? You have that quiet, serious look. My cousin's one, she said, grinning. They all look like they're carrying blueprints in their heads. He laughed genuinely this time. Felt strange, pleasantly strange. They started talking. She told him she was a freelance graphic designer, passionate about art, always looking for new inspiration. She was easy to talk to, warm, and unpretentious. He didn't mention that he was married. When he left that night, he told himself it was harmless, a simple conversation. But the warmth in his chest as he drove home told a different story. At home, Amelia was unaware of the tiny crack forming in their marriage. She continued managing everything, his meals, his wardrobe, even his friends. If someone called David and she didn't approve of them, she'd discourage him from visiting. One Sunday, David's old friend, Victor, invited him to a small reunion at a bar in Ikoyi. David mentioned it casually over breakfast. Amelia immediately frowned. Victor? The one who always drinks too much and talks nonsense? Why do you still hang around him? He's been my friend since university, David replied quietly. Still, he's not a good influence. You don't need to spend your evening with men who have nothing better to do. He looked down at his plate. I'll tell him I can't make it then. Good, she said, satisfied, sipping her tea. But inside, something in David died a little that morning. The part of him that used to push back, that used to dream of freedom. A few weeks later, Chloe called him unexpectedly on a Friday afternoon. Hey, Mr. Architect. Remember me? David smiled despite himself. Of course. You sound tired. Want to grab coffee after work? He hesitated. Amelia would expect him home early. But the thought of sitting through another evening of criticism made his chest tighten. Sure, he said softly. Coffee sounds nice. They met at a cafe in Victoria Island. They talked for hours about work, childhood dreams, random things. Chloe was easy company. She listened when he spoke and laughed without restraint. It made him feel seen, heard. As he dropped her off at her apartment that evening, she said, You're a really kind man, David. I can tell you're not married. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He smiled faintly. Yeah, he lied. I'm divorced. That night, as Amelia lay beside him, typing something on her laptop, David stared at the ceiling. The word divorced echoed in his mind like thunder. He hadn't planned to say it, it just slipped out. But for some reason, it gave him a strange sense of release. For once, he wasn't the quiet husband of the ever-controlling Amelia. He was just David, free, spontaneous, untethered. And he liked how that felt. Amelia began to notice subtle changes in him. He smiled less at home, but laughed more on his phone. He started staying out later, claiming office deadlines. He changed his cologne, something he'd never done without asking her opinion before. She asked once, You've been working so hard lately. Is everything okay? He looked at her for a long moment and said, Yeah, everything's fine. But she could sense the distance growing between them. And though she didn't admit it, it terrified her. Amelia often told her friends she was blessed with a calm husband. She didn't realize that calmness was no longer peace. It was exhaustion. She thought control was love. She thought her decisions were protection. She didn't see that she had slowly suffocated the man she claimed to cherish. And now, for the first time in years, someone else was making him feel alive. Late one evening, after another argument about his lateness, David retreated to the balcony. The city below glittered with lights. The noise of Lagos nightlife floated upward. Music, laughter, life. He took out his phone. A message from Chloe blinked on the screen. Hope you're okay. Just thinking about you. He typed back before he could stop himself. I'm fine now. Thanks, Chloe. As he hit send, something inside him shifted permanently. He didn't know it yet, but the lie he had told to escape control would soon set off a chain of events that would change everything. For him, for Amelia, and for the fragile illusion of their perfect marriage. The morning sun was already fierce over Lagos, its golden glare bouncing off the rooftops and windshields on the Lekki Ape Expressway. The city hummed, restless and alive, but inside David Morgan's car, there was a strange stillness, a silence that wasn't empty, but heavy. He was driving to work, same route as always, but the rhythm of his life had quietly changed. The radio played soft R&B, and for the first time in a long while, he let it play. He used to prefer silence. Amelia didn't like background noise. But lately, he found peace in the hum of a song that wasn't dictated by someone else. At the first red light, his phone buzzed. A message from Chloe. Good morning, Mr. Architect. Don't forget to eat breakfast. You think clearer when you do. He smiled. It was a small thing, but it warmed him in ways he couldn't explain. He typed back quickly. Yes, ma'am. Heading to the office now. Good. Don't work too hard. Save some energy for later. He could almost hear her voice in those words. Light, teasing, gentle. The kind of tone he hadn't heard directed at him in years. Chloe Daniels lived in a quiet block of flats in Yaba, close to where the old railway line hummed faintly at night. Her apartment was small but vibrant, filled with color, art, and the smell of vanilla candles. David had been there a few times in the past weeks. Always with a twinge of guilt he pushed deep inside. At first, their meetings were innocent. Coffee after work, walks along the waterfront at Onairu Beach, late-night talks about dreams and disappointments. But something about Chloe made him lower his guard. She listened without judgment, laughed easily, and never tried to fix him. One Friday evening, they sat in her living room as the rain poured outside. Lagos rain had its own rhythm, urgent, loud, cleansing. Chloe sat cross-legged on the couch, sketching something on her iPad. David watched her quietly. You're staring, she said without looking up. He smiled faintly. Can't help it. She laughed. Careful, you'll make me blush. He leaned back. You're not easily embarrassed. True, she said, glancing up. But you're still learning to breathe. Her words hit something inside him. What do you mean? She set down her iPad and looked at him with soft eyes. Every time you talk about your past, you sound like someone who's been holding his breath for years. He looked away. Maybe I have. Then maybe it's time to exhale, she whispered. The rain softened outside. In that quiet, her words felt louder than thunder. At home, Amelia noticed the difference. David had become unpredictable. Not rude or distant exactly, but different. He no longer told her every detail of his day. Sometimes he laughed to himself while checking his phone. He changed his cologne again, started wearing brighter shirts. One Saturday morning, she stood by the window watching him wash his car. His movements were slower, thoughtful. He even hummed a tune, something she hadn't seen him do since their early years of marriage. David, she called. He turned, water dripping from the hose. Yes. Are you going somewhere today? Not really. Maybe out for a drive later. With who? She asked quickly. He hesitated just a fraction of a second. Victor. Haven't seen him in a while. She nodded but didn't smile. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right. She wanted to ask more, but pride kept her quiet. Amelia wasn't the type to beg for answers. Later that evening, David wasn't with Victor. He was with Chloe. They had decided to take a short drive to Tarqua Bay. The air was salty, the sky painted in shades of orange and violet. As the small boat carried them across the lagoon, Chloe laughed, holding onto his arm as the waves splashed lightly. Do you ever stop worrying? She teased. I'm an architect, he said, smiling. We're trained to worry about everything. Well, she said, leaning closer, you're safe here. For the first time in a long while, he believed it. They spent the evening walking barefoot on the sand. She told him about her childhood in Benin City, her love for art, her fear of becoming ordinary. He told her about his first design project, the joy of seeing a building come alive from paper. At some point, their hands brushed and stayed that way. It wasn't fireworks or music or madness. It was quiet understanding. Two people who didn't need to speak to be heard. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, Chloe turned to him. You still haven't told me what really happened with your marriage. He froze. He had been waiting for this, dreading it. He looked at her, eyes soft with guilt. It just didn't work out. Why? He exhaled slowly. We stopped seeing each other. She stopped hearing me. I stopped speaking. Chloe reached out, touching his hand. That's sad. It is, he said quietly. But maybe it was for the best. She nodded, though her expression was unreadable. You deserve peace, David. Everyone does. He smiled faintly, even as his chest tightened with guilt. That night, back in Lekki, Amelia waited for him. She had prepared dinner, jollof rice and grilled chicken, his favorite, but it had gone cold hours ago. The wall clock ticked past 10 p.m. When she finally heard his car in the driveway, her heart leapt, but her pride remained seated. He walked in, smelling faintly of sea air and new perfume. "You're late," she said, voice even. "Yeah, work ran late," he lied softly. She studied him. "You didn't call. Phone battery died." It wasn't the first time she'd heard that. She turned away, forcing a calm tone. "There's food in the kitchen. I already ate." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. "At work." He hesitated. "Yeah." She didn't press further. But as he walked past her, she whispered, "You're changing, David." He stopped, hand on the staircase railing. "Maybe," he said softly, "maybe I'm just remembering who I am." In the days that followed, the cracks widened. Amelia threw herself into her business, staying longer at her design studio in Victoria Island. When people asked about her husband, she smiled tightly and said, "He's busy. We both are." But at night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her thoughts loud in the silence. She began to wonder if her orderliness, her need for control, had built a house so perfect that love had no room to breathe. Meanwhile, David's bond with Chloe deepened. They spent evenings cooking together, laughing over burnt plantain, sharing stories about growing up in Nigeria. She reminded him of the joy in small things, the taste of suya on a rainy night, the thrill of unplanned moments, the comfort of being seen. Sometimes they just sat in silence, her head on his shoulder, the city lights flickering through the window. It wasn't just romance. It was relief. But guilt was never far away. One night, as they watched the rain through the glass, Chloe said softly, "Do you ever think of her?" David's jaw tightened. "Sometimes." "What do you feel?" He hesitated. "Sadness, pity, and shame." She turned to him. "You're not a bad man, David. You just got lost." He looked at her then, eyes glistening. "What if I hurt you too?" She smiled faintly. "Then at least I'll know it was real." The honesty of her words cut deeper than any accusation. Back in Lekki, Amelia started noticing the empty spaces. His cologne lingered differently. His laughter wasn't for her anymore. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just stress. But deep down, a fear began to grow, the kind that pride couldn't silence. One night, unable to sleep, she walked to the living room and found David's old sketchbook on the shelf. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were drawings of buildings, bridges, and her face, drawn in pencil, gentle and hopeful. Beneath one of the sketches, he had written, "Amelia, my foundation." Tears burned in her eyes. Somewhere along the line, she had stopped being that. Two worlds now existed for David. In one, there was Chloe, warm, patient, full of light. In the other, Amelia, sharp, distant, yet still tied to his soul in ways he couldn't untangle. He lived between them, torn by guilt and longing. And though Chloe made him feel alive, a small voice in his heart whispered that peace built on lies could never last. One evening, as he drove home after leaving Chloe's apartment, the sky darkened with rain clouds. His phone buzzed again. It was Amelia. "David," she said when he answered, her voice small, almost trembling. "Are you happy?" He froze. "What?" "I don't know," she said, struggling to keep her tone steady. I feel like I don't know you anymore." He swallowed hard, staring at the road. "Maybe we both stopped knowing each other." The line went silent. Then she whispered, "Do you still love me?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the rain that began to fall. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I remember what it felt like." Then he ended the call. That night, as lightning flashed across the sky, David parked by the lagoon and sat in his car for a long time. The city lights shimmered on the water like broken promises. He had wanted freedom, but freedom without truth felt like another kind of prison. He closed his eyes, torn between two worlds, one built on love that had suffocated him, and another built on affection that had freed him but couldn't last. As the rain poured harder, he whispered to himself, "What have I done?" And somewhere in Lekki, Amelia lay awake too, staring into the dark, whispering the same thing. The Harmattan winds had softened by the time February arrived in Lagos. The city, ever restless, shimmered with its usual chaos. Impatient drivers, street vendors shouting prices, and the golden haze that hung over Third Mainland Bridge every evening. But inside Amelia Morgan's house in Lekki, silence had become the loudest sound of all. The house still gleamed, spotless floors, perfectly arranged cushions, and air diffusers whispering lavender into the air. But something essential had gone missing. Love. Or maybe the quiet confidence that love still lived there. It had been 3 months since the shift began. 3 months since David's late nights, strange calls, and unfamiliar scents became impossible to ignore. Amelia had told herself not to overthink, that he was working hard, that he was just tired. But the unease refused to leave her chest. It followed her to the office, into the shower, into her dreams. One Saturday morning, she stood by the window, watching him wash his car. His movements were slower, more thoughtful. And then he did something that froze her heart. He hummed a tune. It was soft, almost playful. The kind of tune he hadn't hummed since their early years of marriage. It should have made her smile. Instead, it made her ache. That hum belonged to a version of him she thought had disappeared. So why did it sound like someone else had found it? That evening, after dinner, she decided to ask. David was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. The television played softly in the background, one of those talent shows they used to enjoy together. "David?" she began, her tone light, almost cautious. He looked up, his expression guarded. "Yes. Are you happy?" she asked quietly. He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean with us. With this." She gestured vaguely around the room. "You've been distant lately. You come home late, you barely talk. I keep wondering if it's me." He looked down at his hands. For a long time he didn't speak. Then he said softly, "I don't know how to answer that." Her throat tightened. "Try." He sighed. "I'm tired, Amelia. Tired of walking on eggshells in my own house. Tired of feeling like a project instead of a husband." Her eyes widened. "A project?" "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You plan everything, control everything. You say it's for us, but it's always your way. I don't even recognize myself anymore." Amelia felt something in her chest crack open. "I was trying to help you," she whispered. "I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "But you never asked if I wanted help." They sat in silence, the distance between them suddenly visible, wide and heavy. That night, they slept back to back, the air between them cold despite the Lagos heat. Days passed. The cracks widened. Amelia threw herself into her business, staying longer at her studio in Victoria Island. When friends asked about David, she smiled tightly and said, "He's busy. We both are." But at night, she stared at the ceiling, wondering if her perfection had pushed love out the door. If maybe she'd built a house so flawless that affection couldn't breathe inside it. Meanwhile, David drifted further away, toward the warmth of Chloe's apartment in Onairu. She was laughter and lightness, no expectations, no corrections. She didn't try to fix him. She just listened. They cooked together, laughed over burnt plantain, and sat by the window watching the city glow. For the first time in years, he felt seen. But every time she smiled at him, guilt stirred in his chest, because beneath the laughter, he still thought of Amelia, her steady hands, her jasmine scent, her fierce love buried under pride. One evening, as the sun dipped over the lagoon, Chloe noticed his silence. "Talk to me," she said gently. "You're here, but not really." He rubbed his temples. "It's just complicated." She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "You still love her." He exhaled, defeated. "Maybe. I don't even know what that love looks like anymore." "Then find out," she said softly. "But don't keep living two lives. It'll destroy you." He turned to her, eyes searching. You're okay with me saying that? She smiled faintly. I care about you, David, but I don't want to be someone's escape. Go fix what you broke, if it's fixable. Her words lingered long after he left that night. Amelia's breaking point came a week later. She had driven to David's office to surprise him, something she hadn't done in years. But when she arrived, the receptionist said he'd left hours earlier. Left? Amelia asked, confused. Yes, ma'am. Around 4. Said he had an appointment. Her stomach tightened. She thanked the woman and walked out, her pulse pounding. She drove aimlessly for an hour before ending up near the lagoon, and that's when she saw it. David's car, parked beside the water. Through the windshield, she saw him not alone. A woman sat beside him, laughing softly. Chloe. Amelia froze. The world tilted. The sound of the waves, the chatter of distant hawkers, all faded into silence. She watched them from her car, unable to breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that somewhere, somehow, she had lost him long before this. Tears burned her eyes. She turned on the ignition and drove away before he could see her. That night, David returned home to darkness. The house was still spotless, but something was different. On the dining table sat a single envelope. Inside, Amelia's handwriting. I saw you today. I don't even know what hurts more, that you lied or that I made it so easy for you to want to. I need time. Don't call me. Not yet. He sank into a chair, his chest tight with regret. For the first time, he realized how much of their silence he had helped create. He had blamed her control, but he had also chosen to withdraw instead of speak. And now everything was broken. Weeks passed. Amelia moved out temporarily, staying in her cousin's apartment in Surrey. She stopped wearing her wedding ring. Her friends whispered, her mother prayed, and her phone stayed silent. She thought distance would bring relief, but it only amplified the ache. She missed him. Not the arguments, but the way he used to reach for her hand in crowded rooms, the way he listened, the way his presence steadied her heart. David, meanwhile, was drowning in guilt. Chloe had ended things gently. He stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped pretending. One Sunday morning, he showed up at Amelia's studio. She froze when she saw him, thinner, unshaven, eyes hollow. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. He took a shaky breath. "I came to apologize. For everything. For lying. For hiding. For making you feel small when I should have protected what we had." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "And what about her?" "It's over," he said quietly. "It was never love. It was escape." Amelia looked away, tears threatening. "You broke so. Meeting David. I don't even know if I can trust you again." "I know," he said softly. "And I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just needed you to know. I'm not running anymore. I want to fix this, if there's even a small chance left." He handed her a small box. Inside was her ring. "I've been carrying it every day," he said, "because I couldn't wear mine without yours." She closed the box slowly, heart torn between pain and longing. "Go home," she whispered. "I need to think." He nodded and left quietly. The following weeks were filled with silence again. But this time it wasn't avoidance. It was reflection. Amelia started therapy. She began to understand how her fear of failure had turned into control. David, too, began attending sessions, learning how silence had become his shield instead of his strength. They didn't talk for almost 2 months. But healing, like Lagos rain, came slowly, unpredictable, cleansing. Then, one quiet evening, she showed up at their old house. David was on the balcony, staring at the city lights. When he saw her, his breath caught. "Amelia." She stepped closer. "I wasn't sure I'd come." He swallowed. "I'm glad you did." They stood there in silence for a long moment, the hum of distant traffic filling the air. Finally, she spoke. "I still don't trust you completely, and I still have a lot to work through. But I don't want to build walls anymore." He took a tentative step closer. "Neither do I." Tears welled in her eyes. "I miss us, David. The real us." He reached for her hand, gently this time. Then let's start again. No control. No silence. Just us. She hesitated, then let his hand close around hers. And for the first time in months, she felt warmth instead of anger. They didn't kiss. They didn't rush. They just stood there, hand in hand, watching the city lights dance across the lagoon. Two people broken but brave enough to begin again. In the months that followed, rebuilding wasn't easy. They fought, cried, forgave, and learned. Amelia started letting go, learning that love didn't need perfection to survive. David found his voice again, learning that peace didn't mean silence. And slowly, their home came alive once more. Not flawless, not spotless, but real. On a warm Sunday morning, they drove together to Tarqua Bay, the same beach where he had once walked with Chloe. This time, he held Amelia's hand openly. No lies, no weight between them. The waves crashed softly at their feet as the sun set behind them, orange, gold, and forgiving. Amelia turned to him, smiling faintly. "We've come a long way," he nodded. "And we'll keep walking." She leaned her head on his shoulder as they watched the horizon, the past behind them, the future unfolding quietly in the rhythm of the tide.